Good to see you all here. I know last week was a little of an awkward day. It seemed like everybody got sick last week almost, and it was a little hectic Sunday night, but Lord willing, everything will be better today. I feel much better. I was just talking with Jeff. He was also sick, and we both said last night we got the best rest we had in a couple of weeks, and so thankful to the Lord for that. Okay, let's start by opening your Bibles to Job chapter 1. Just go ahead and just turn over there. We're going to start there in just a moment. I have one verse here up on the screen. I'll get started with this. 1 John chapter 5, verse 4. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. What does John mean by that verse? So whatever is born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world. Our faith. How so? Well, let's start with the definition. Define faith from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, and the New King James says the evidence of things not seen. I was just talking to my two little boys about that. I asked them, what does that mean? Evidence of things not seen. And so I asked them, can you describe to me what wind is? And they're shaking their head, no, you can't, right? Because you can't see it. So I said, can you show me evidence of the wind? Wait, the flag blowing in the wind. I was like, yeah, the flag. That's right. So we can't see it, but we see evidence of it. Is there evidence of God? All over the place. And that's, again, me and the boys, we were talking about that this morning. We're talking about the earth and where it's at. And he must have learned this in school. I asked him, do you know that they call the earth, that we're in what they call the Goldilocks position? And little Jonah was like, oh, I know what that means. And he began to explain that whole thing. I was so proud of him. But that our faith is that we know there is a God. We know that he created all things. We know that he is interested in us and that he sent his son for us, right? So that's, in a nutshell, that's our faith. What do we know about Job? Give me some descriptions of who Job is. Who's Job? Righteous man, upright man. Rich man. Very good, Jim. He died. Yes. All right. Well, he was faithful. Faithful. That is true. Did he have? Can you tell me what sins Job committed? Oh, yeah. His wife wasn't so faithful. She gave some bad commands.
Maybe doubt.
Maybe. I like that. Doubt. So, did Job, you don't need to answer this yet, we'll read the passages and then we'll answer these two questions. Did Job know who was bringing those trials that we're going to read about against him? And did he ever know what was going on behind the scenes in the battle for his soul? That says Job 6 through 12. That should be Job 1. So I want to ask some of you all to read. Gary, would you mind turning to Job chapter 1 and read verses 6 through 12? Jim, chapter 2, verses 1 through 8 after Gary. So let's start, Gary, with you. Job 1, starting at verse 6 to verse 12. Okay, well, before we actually read the next part, let's talk about that. So you got God, he's there. The picture that we're seeing, there's God. He's out there with the sons of God. Who are the sons of God, you think? Angels. I think they're the angels. And set apart from that, you have Satan there among them as well. And God asked him, where you been? And where has he been? He says, going around the earth. What do you think he was doing? Yeah, seeking those whom he may devour. What was it? Same thing? Yeah, he's looking to accuse people, right? That's what he does. He goes around accusing the brethren. Just like over in the letter that Jude wrote, what was he arguing with the archangel Michael about? That's right, the body of Moses. He believed it belonged to him. Why? He sinned. He's mine. And that's what he does. Day in, day out, going around. And he is able to do that because he hasn't been thrown down yet because of sin. So he's up there accusing us all day. So here he comes. God said, all right, here's Satan. What you doing, Satan? Where you been? And he tells them, and then God presents, have you considered accusing, you could say, my servant Job? And Satan's reaction, you built a hedge around him. Yeah, this is he's only righteous because of all the protection you've given him. So God says, okay, you can go down there, but don't touch him. Let's read chapter 2, Jim, verses 1 through 8. So again, same scene. Here comes Satan. Where you been, Satan? Have you? And you know it probably irked Satan. Where you been, Satan? Roaming around the earth. Have you considered Job? You know I have. It didn't go well. And so the Lord sends him against him again, but this time he can touch his flesh. What do you think? Now we know what's going on. Job has no idea, right? He doesn't know what's going on. We're going to, actually, before I get to the next part, let's read one more section. And look at these two questions. This is from Job 1:21 and 2:10. We've already read both of those. But who does Job assume was bringing these troubles upon him? And how was that actually his first great mistake? And that what appears to be a reaction of faith. So I want to read chapter 1, verse 21, 20 and 21. This is after Job lost all his possessions and his children. And it says, then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell to the ground and worshiped. He said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And then chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. This is the wife situation. Then the wife said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So, who does Job assume was bringing these troubles on him? God. Did God bring those troubles on him? Did he allow it? But he didn't bring it, did he? See, he doesn't know. Immediately, he is jumping to some assumptions here. But they're not accurate. But these assumptions are going to cause him some problems as he begins to throw out questions, one after another, all throughout the letter. And turn over to chapter 38. Yeah, chapter 38. And if you'll notice in chapters 36, 37, this is the youngest friend of Job is talking there, all the way to the very end of chapter 37. And chapter 38 opens up, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, answer Job, wait a minute, of what? He's answering all the questions Job has been throwing out there throughout the book. So what I want us to do is work through this journey of Job's here. He has great faith to failure to an even greater faith. But there is a failure. And I want us to see if we can discover that. I think it'll be easy as we will work through these, read some of these passages, and look at him. And he is an example of great faith. And I bet we've all, at some level, have done this. I know I've run into many people who have blamed God for their troubles. Well, I kind of gave it away there, but that's what Job is doing. He's blaming God for his troubles, but does Job ever turn his back on God? No. I know a lot of people who blame God for their troubles, but they immediately turn their back on him. Job doesn't do that, but he does blame God for what's happening to him. He doesn't understand why. So I want us to look at that, and we'll start with we already read those 2 verses. How did Job react to his trials? We just read that. He reacted, he worshiped God. He recognizes God is in control. That's all good. But how does he know God brought this upon him? He doesn't. He does not know. Now, does God sometimes bring adversity upon his people? Yeah. Does he do it to Israel whenever they sin? Right? Yeah, absolutely. So what happened to his strength and resolve? Let's turn to chapter 3. I'm going to attempt to read this chapter. I want to read the whole thing. And I debated that because of how much time it takes, but I think we need to know this as part of what we're looking at. So Job chapter 3, verse 1 to the end of the chapter. Afterward, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, "Let the day perish on which I was to be born, and the night which said, a boy is conceived. May that day be darkness. Let not God above care for it, nor light shine on it. Let darkness and black gloom claim it. Let a cloud settle on it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for the night, let darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful shout enter it. Let those curse it who curse the day, who are prepared to rouse Leviathan. Let the stars of its twilight be darkened. Let it wait for light, but have none. Let it not see the breaking dawn, because it did not shut the opening of my mother's womb, or hide trouble from my eyes." What's wrong with Job? Life is pretty bad. Here we go on. Why did I not die at birth, come forth from the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me, and why the breast that I should suck? For now I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept then. I would have been at rest with kings and with counselors of the earth, who rebuilt ruins for themselves, or with princes who had gold, who were filling their houses with silver, or like a miscarriage, which is discarded. I would not be as infants that never saw light. There the wicked cease from raging, and there the weary are at rest. The prisoners are at ease together. They do not hear the voice of the taskmaster. The small and the great are there, and the slave is free from his master. What is he describing? Everyone else is there, great and small. Those who had good lives, bad lives. I want to be there with them. It's far better than what I've got right now. And I won't read to the end of that. Who's he talking to? Actually, he's talking, himself and his friends. Remember, in the end of chapter 2, his friends show up, and we know the story. But this is the best thing, that these are true friends. They come, they sit down, they see his pain, and they say not a word for 7 days. They just sit there. That's fantastic. That's good. Those are good friends, but unfortunately, they're going to open their mouths. But some of the things they say make a lot of sense. So, what happened to the strength and the resolve of Job? Is that what you're about ready to answer, or another comment? All right, go ahead first. Right. And how long does this last for Job? Seems like a long time. We already know it's been a week, as his friends were there with him, at least at that point. So longer than that, at least. But looking at chapter 3 and what was going on in chapter 2, what happened to that strength and resolve? All right, we'll come back to that. So what advice does his friend begin giving him? I actually want us to read it. Chad, would you turn to chapter 4, look at verses 1 through 9? Jesse, can you take a look at chapter 5, verse 8, and then verses 17 and 19? Okay. Actually, before you read, Jesse, let's look at that. The New American Standard talks about him being how patient he was, discussing and talking with people and helping through them and strengthening them. But now here's Job. He's so impatient, he says. But he says something, he brings something up that we hear a lot today. He talks about it here toward the end when he says, according to this verse 8, according to what I have seen, those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble harvest it. What's our New Testament update to that? You reap what you sow. That's Paul, the book of Galatians. Now, do we still hear people saying that, even those who don't believe in God, or they still say that? You reap what you sow? What do we mean by that? If you sow it, you're going to reap it. And what was Paul talking about? Do you remember what he was talking about with that statement when he brought it up? If you sow to the flesh, what do you reap? The deeds of the flesh. If you sow to the Spirit, what do you reap? The fruit of the Spirit. That was his only point with that. Now, what is Job's friend saying? If you're reaping a heartache and problems in your life, that must mean you sowed to it. And a lot of people believe that still today. So for a lot of people, theologically, this would actually make sense. This would be a strong argument if you don't have a good understanding of what Paul meant by that phrase. So he's actually making a good argument. Misplaced. It's not true. But that argument's pretty sound with the worldly way of looking at things. So but he's right though. So who doesn't perish? Everyone perishes. They all die. So his argument doesn't work. Yeah, well, he's a good Catholic. Because everyone's born in sin in their minds, and so they have to be baptized. But they are free. They are innocent. And so we go on. Let's read, what we say, 5, 8, and then 17 and 19. Okay. So what is this friend telling Job? Yes, right. Hey, you need to accept the punishment of the Lord. This is to get your attention. Now, doesn't that make sense to a certain degree? So what have you done? Now, they're not coming out right out and saying it just yet, but they're asking, what have you done, Job? You've done something wrong. All you need to do is repent to the Lord, and this will go away. This will all go away. So we need to learn. Well, I don't want to go there yet. Not yet. Let's go to the next one. Oh, it's up there. No, it's not. Okay, so what was Job looking for to make sense of his condition? This is going to be chapter 7, 17 to 21. I'm going to read this one. Chapter 7, looking at 17 to the end of the chapter. Job says this: "What is man that you, God, magnify him, and that you are concerned about him, that you examine him every morning and try him every moment? Will you never turn your gaze away from me, nor let me alone until I swallow my spittle? Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me, but I will not be." What is Job telling God? What have I done? What sin have I committed that I have not repented for? Remember the beginning of the book, we didn't read this. He opens up with him offering sacrifice for sins, and then for his sons, just in case they did something wrong. And he was a righteous, an upright man. This is a man who followed after the word of God. And when he sinned, he atoned for that sin every single time. So he's asking, what have I done? What have I done, God? Why am I your target? So what does he think God's doing to him? Yeah, but God is after him. Doesn't this sound just like Naomi? Remember Naomi, when she came home from being afar, she was very bitter, right? She believed God's hand was against her and that there was no hope. She came home empty. Job believes God is against him, but he doesn't know why. Has he turned his back on God? No. But he does believe God is working against him. So here's the first few questions we were seeing him pop up for God. Why am I your target practice, God? Why are you doing this to me? What have I done? Can you show me? Could you imagine saying that to God? But again, when you're in that much pain and that much heartache, he's angry. He is frustrated. Life is difficult. So what accusations does he begin to hurl next? Let's go to chapter 9, 14 to 24. John, would you read chapter 9, 14? Is that, no? Yeah, starting verse 13 to 24. Whew. Man. So Job is saying, you're calling me guilty, but I am guiltless. Now, and at the very end, he says, God is the one who destroys the wicked and the guiltless. He destroys them both. Why is he saying that? What's that? He's in pain. He has moved away from assumptions to believing this is a fact. God is against me, but I'm not going to turn my back on him, but I don't understand. What words could I say? I've done nothing wrong. Now, is he right when he says that he is guiltless? Well, yes and no. I mean, yeah, he has sinned, but he has done all that God has required of him. Has he done anything to bring about this pain from God? Well, he believes it came from God, but it did not come from God. He's got a misunderstanding. And so he's beginning to blame God now. It's God's fault, isn't it? And so what is he confident about himself? When we see verses 17 and verse 20, what is Job confident about himself? I already mentioned it once. He's blameless. He has done nothing wrong. What is it that he has done to deserve these things? So that's what he's throwing out there. Turn over to chapter 10, verses 1 through 3, and then verse 7. I'll read that. I loathe my own life. I will give full vent to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Let me know why you contend with me. Is it right for you indeed to oppress, to reject the labor of your hands? And then verse 7. According to your knowledge, I am indeed not guilty, yet there is no deliverance from your hand. Okay, so I think it's pretty clear. What sin do we see occurring in Job? Yeah, he is venting. Yeah, he's got a lot going on. That's right. And he brings up the term in both passages we've read earlier, bitterness, which is a normal emotion to have in this situation. What has he done with that bitterness?
Turned it against God.
I think you're right. He is not dealing with that emotion properly. He's making a mistake. He's messing up. No one is sinless. He knows that. And a lot of times we work through the book of Job thinking that he has done absolutely nothing wrong all throughout, but he is. He hasn't turned his back on God. He's not cursing God, but he is bitter. and he is saying it. He's not just venting. You'll see more. There's a lot more going on. He is angry. And God's going to bring all that out here in a moment when we get toward the end. So, go ahead. Well, I'm sure he does. Well, people who are of the faith, when they run into situations like this in their lives, I've talked to many of them where they will become bitter, and who do they blame? God. They always blame God. And they turn away. I shouldn't say they always blame God, but that's a lot what happens, and very little do I hear them bring up Satan at all. Job is doing the same. I'm pretty sure he knows who Satan is, but we don't see him bringing that up. That is true in these passages.
This is like the oldest book, correct?
Well, there's two beliefs on this. Some believe that this was written during the time of the patriarchal period, before the flood. Some believe that this is actually a time period in the Judges, and there's an argument for that as well. Well, I would think if he was in the patriarchal period before the flood, he would have quite a bit of knowledge of that passed down to him. And if it was in the time of Judges, then he would have quite a bit of information in the law, and he clearly knows it about who Satan is. It does. There's good arguments on both. Yep, very good. All right, so we see him arguing with God. We got time for all this. What does Job ask God to do? I'll read chapter 13, 20 to 24. Only two things do not do to me, then I will not hide from your face. Remove your hand from me, and let not the dread of you terrify me. Then call, and I will answer. Or let me speak, then reply to me. How many of my iniquities and sins? Make known to me my rebellion and my sin. There it is. All right, God, what did I do wrong? You show me. Come here. I'll speak, and you answer. Tell me what I did. Should he be making that kind of charge against God? Something like that, yeah. This all stems from the same problem. Bitterness. What have I done? And really, when you look at his life, was he a righteous, upright man? Yes, he was. So why are you doing this to me? I've done all the right things. I've checked all the boxes, you could say. This shouldn't be happening to me. I'm righteous. You must be a God who condemns the wicked and the righteous. It's almost as if he kind of believes also what that first friend told him, whatever you sow, that's what you reap. Take a look at yourself. And he's thinking about, you know what? I know what I've sowed, and what I'm reaping doesn't fit with what I'm sowing. God's wrong. But that's not how that works. Okay, let's move on because we got to get through quite a bit here. So he got other accusations. I got Job chapter 16, 9, 11 through 14, 17, chapter 19, 7 to 12, 23, 3 through 16. But let's go on to the next one. When God finally answers, what does Job begin to see about himself? And there's more questions he throws in than number 9 there that we can go back, or you can go back and look at for yourself. But after all this, his friends are still hounding him. In chapter 38, God begins to answer all these questions. And when we look at all the questions, I wish we had time to look at all of them, this line of thought from God makes so much more sense. So he opens up. So just out of nowhere, verse 1, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by my words without knowledge? All right, let's start with that one first. Darkens my counsel. What does God mean by that when he's talking to Job? You're making it sound like I'm this big, bad, mean guy up here, and I'm just striking you down for no good reason. But what do you really know, Job? Let's find out. Verse 3. Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who set its measurements, since you know? Or who stretched the line on it? On what were the bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? And then chapter 40, verses 1 through 8. Then the Lord said to Job, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves God answer it. All right, let's stop there. All right. So what is God saying? In the first one, chapter 38, what is God saying to Job? What do you know? You think you know a lot, but what do you really know? It started with, I think, an assumption, and that bitterness turned it into a fact in your mind. But you have no idea. Where were you when I created the earth? Were you there? When I created man? When I did all these things? You don't know anything, Job. And what has he been doing? Fault find. That's very true. There in verse 2 of chapter 40, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves God answer it. Fault finder. Is that true of Job? Yeah. That's exactly what he was doing. Then, verse 3, Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. Once I have spoken, and I will not answer, even twice, and I will add nothing more. Then the Lord answered Job out of the storm and said, now gird up your loins like a man. I will ask you, you instruct me. Will you really annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? And we could read on, and it makes more sense, the things that God is saying there. When you just read through the book of Job and just look at his questions, he throws to God. But if you ever read through it, you want to say, mark those. You just write down the verses of every question he throws to God. And then before you read chapter 38, go back and read those. Read every question and then read God's response. And those things begin to make a lot more sense. So Job immediately said, I should have put my hand over my mouth. Now, this is why I love the child-parent analogy. Have you ever, those of us who've had kids, ever told a child, I want you to do this, that, or the other, and then the child says, why? That ever happen? All the time. I remember I used to, in the very beginning, try to explain. Could they understand it? No. So now, do you know what does the parent say now? Because I said so. Just do it. Because you don't know yet. You don't have the experience. You weren't there where I was. You weren't born yet. But I know. I'm trying to lead you in the right direction. You don't know. I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to help you. That's what's happening here between God and Job. What do you know, Job? You think you know. Oh, man, the parents are always wrong. If the parents don't understand me, the parents don't know. But they do. God does. And Job did not understand. And so, God finally answers, what does Job begin to see about himself? He was wrong. I should have covered my mouth. And how, as we begin to wrap this up, how did Job's faith actually become stronger through his trials? Let's look at verses 1 through 6 of chapter 42. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have declared that which I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. Hear now, and I will speak. I will ask you, and you instruct me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I retract, and I repent in dust and ashes. Repent of what? The things I said. That bitterness that welled up in him. He didn't know. Just like Naomi. Just like happens to us in this day and age too, where we might blame God. And that's what we've been talking about on Sunday nights with those emotions. And when we talk about bitterness, if we don't properly deal with that emotion, what can it do to us? Look what it did to Job. It didn't cause him to turn his back on God. It does cause a lot of people to, but he didn't. He didn't curse God, but he was blaming God for something God did not do because he didn't know. And he never does find out, does he, that we see in the text. But we see it. It's put there for a reason so we can see and we don't make that mistake. So, Job was an example of perseverance, God's mercy. Not because he did not sin, but why? As an example, brethren, of suffering and patience, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. We count those blessed who endured. You have heard of the endurance of Job and have seen the outcome of the Lord's dealings, that the Lord is full of compassion and is merciful. What did Job endure? Okay. Physical pain. What else did he endure? Right. Okay, now and that is true. Those are all the physical things. One of the things we fail to sometimes look at is the mental side of things he endured. What else did he endure? Mentally. What about the attacks from his friends? Separation?
From his friends, and even separation from God.
Okay, yeah, that. And his wife. And mentally, he thought God was attacking him for no good reason. And he was praying and calling upon God, but God was not answering, as he said. Where are you? Why are you not answering me? And there was that bitterness. But he never turned his back on God. He endured through all that, even his own mental inability to see what was going on. And when the truth was brought to him, he accepted it and repented. This is, I think, one of the great examples of faith because this is something that we endure all the time in our lives. And sometimes we may think, well, why is God letting this happen? Well, we live in a lost and dying world full of sin. God doesn't want any bad things to happen to us. But he does provide the way for us to endure these things, to overcome them, and grow in our faith to him. That's what James is talking about, the opening of the book of James. And I wish we could get more into it. We're over time. I want us to pick up on this a little bit more next week. But think about that. If you've got time this week, read through the book of Job. Mark those questions that Job puts forth to God, and then read chapter 38 and 39 and 41 and 40. And those things will make so much more sense when we keep that in context, that he's answering all of Job's questions that he had been asking and putting out all through the book. We'll wrap up there. We'll pick up again next week. Thank you. Good morning. Open your Bibles to Ruth chapter 4, please. Ruth chapter 4. We're going to continue and finish up our series on the book of Ruth. And I want to start off with this saying. We probably all heard this saying, that you can't get there from here. You heard that one before? I looked it up online, and apparently that saying began in Maine and was used in response to a person asking for directions to get to a distant location that could not be assessed from where they were at without extensive and complicated directions. And to some extent, apparently it has to do with the whole area up there because of the way the mountains and the roads are there in the rural area. But I want to use that phrase this morning. You can't get there from here as a launching point as we finish up this book of Ruth. And we've been calling this series Trusting God in Our Life's journey. So that's because of the way of what Naomi and Ruth had to do, and that's what all of us have to do as well when we run into ups and downs, where sometimes it looks like life is pretty hard on us. We can't expect that our lives are going to be a smooth, straight line from where we are to where we want to go. So the truth is not that we can't get there from here, but that we can't get there from here in this nice, smooth, straight line, like we're driving on the highway here in Arizona, nice straight line, right? It's not going to be like that. We need to trust God in our journey, because our journey is not going to be all roses and smooth. It's going to have dead ends. It's going to have ups and downs, sudden turns or stops. And the journey that Naomi and Ruth found themselves on was a hard one, mostly downs and what looked like to them dead ends. But one of the key lessons we learn from the book is of Ruth is to trust God in that journey. The setbacks that we experience in our lives may be a way that God is leading us to a place of favor and joy. We started this series referencing the old hymn. We've never sung it here. I couldn't find it in our books. But the title is God Moves in a Mysterious Way, because it encourages us to realize that, as the verse says, the clouds you so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessing. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence, he hides a smiling face. So as we move through this story, we've seen that they experienced a series of setbacks, right? Chapter 1, Naomi and her husband and her 2 sons decided to move from their homeland of Judah out of the famine, and Naomi's husband dies. Her sons marry Moabite women, but they have no children. And then her sons died, leaving both their wives widowed, Naomi without any grandchildren or heirs. And even though they come back from the famine, Ruth decides to stay with Naomi, and it seems like some good is coming. But Naomi's bitter complaint in Ruth 1:21 was, I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me and the Almighty has afflicted me? In chapter 2, Naomi began to have new hope because Boaz appeared on the scene as a possible husband for Ruth, but he didn't propose to Ruth. He didn't make any moves in that direction, at least from what we see in the text. So the chapter closed brimming with some excitement, some new hope, but also with suspense and uncertainty about how things might work out. Then we got to chapter 3. Naomi suggested that Ruth make a risky move in the middle of the night. And so according to the plan, she goes to Boaz on the threshing floor and tells him, in essence, I want you to spread your wing over me. I want you to be my husband. He was pleased by that proposal. He said he'd be happy to be her husband. But there was another man, a closer relative, who gets that first opportunity, as was the Hebrew custom. So Boaz promised Ruth that he would take care of the matter first the next day, and that she would have a husband. It was either going to be him or the other man. So chapter 3 ends with that cliffhanger. But then the exciting conclusion of the story, chapter 4. Let's read. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 4, and see what happens. As it says in verse 1, Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he said, Turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, Sit down here. So they sat down. Then he said to the closest relative, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So I thought to inform you, saying, Buy it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Now, let's go back there to the beginning of verse 1. When Boaz went to the gate of the town, we need to understand that the gate of an ancient town was very different from the kind of gates that we have. It's not like a chain link fence with a chain link gate or anything like that. Usually there was a stone wall going around the city. So the heights can be different, but normally they would have a wooden gate, and it would generally be about 2 stories high to accommodate wagons or anything a little taller than that to come in and out of the city. And so it would be a gate like that. It would open up to a big, large courtyard area. Sometimes it would be a fountain or a place to draw water from right there. And so he's there, and usually in that courtyard, business was done. So the first thing the next morning, Boaz goes to that city gate where business is conducted. He sits down. And the Bible tells us that that other redeemer, that close relative who he was looking for, came by. How many times in the story of Ruth have we seen things just happen coincidentally, right? Naomi and Ruth just happened to arrive back in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Ruth just happened to end up gleaning in the field of a nice man named Boaz, who just happened to be a potential kinsman redeemer. Boaz just happened to come to the field where Ruth was gleaning the first day she came to glean. And now the very man that Boaz is looking for, who he needed to see, just happened to come to the city gate that morning, that time. If I see God's fingerprints and his providence working in all of this. So he invites the man to come over, sit down. And keep in mind, Boaz bears this man no ill will, and they're related to one another. He's not referred to us by name. He's simply called the family redeemer, a close kinsman or kinsman redeemer. And since he is related to deceased, he can redeem his wife and property. So we wonder where this man's been during the harvest, and if he had even been aware of Naomi and Ruth, that they had returned to Judah. Boaz then had to gather up enough men to be witnesses to this official business. He's able to gather a group of 10 respected men of the community. They're sitting there in that public setting. They would also attract probably the attention of everyone else of what's going on. So there's other people listening in. So there's kind of like this public court set up. And this is what Boaz wants, all these witnesses, so they know for certain what's going to happen. And it also takes care of a couple of laws that we read about in the Bible. About the next of kin that stood behind the business that Boaz needed to conduct there at the gate. So the first law comes from Leviticus 25. The economic structure is outlined there. And it gave the Lord ownership of the land and gave Israel the use of that land. And individual families were given the rights to specific parcels of the land from generation to generation. And the use of the land could be sold for a number of years, but the year of Jubilee, the law, the kinsman redeemer law, provided ways for the land to return to the family to whom it originally had been given, so it doesn't fall out of the family. The second law involved legacy. If a man died without an heir, his brother was to marry the widow according to the law of the Levirate marriage that we've explained already in the series. The first son would be the heir of the deceased man, and he would perpetuate his name and inherit the property rights. So Boaz decided to start the proceedings with that discussion about the land first, rather than the legacy. This is the first mentioning that we have that Naomi owned property, that she had some land. We're not told what she did with it, if she could do anything with it, but we knew she had it, and clearly she couldn't produce anything on it. They didn't come in time to produce anything. They didn't have the capabilities of doing that. So the death of Naomi's husband had left the land in limbo. There was no child to inherit it, and Naomi could do nothing with it. Now, after her husband died, her oldest son would have received it, but then he died, right? So there was no one else left to inherit the land. So the family of Naomi's husband had legal right to be first in line to buy the land back and pass it on to a male heir. To our dismay, if you were reading this for the first time, you'd be like, oh no, he's going to redeem it. This is not what we wanted, right? We want Boaz and Ruth to get together, but he says he's going to redeem it. The irony of the setback is that it is being caused by righteousness. He's doing it the right way. He's just doing his duty, Boaz. By redeeming the land, he was supposedly helping this other man, supposedly helping Naomi out and acquiring some good land in the process. So just when the doubt arises in our mind that all this is going to fall apart, Boaz continues at verse 5. Boaz said, "On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance." The closest relative said, "I cannot redeem it for myself because I would jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself. You may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it." Relief, right? The kinsman says that he can't redeem it and encouraged Boaz to do it. He quickly realized how Ruth changed the equation of the transaction. If he purchased the land and fathered a son by Ruth, then the land he purchased would go to that child, and he would lose not only the money he spent on it, he would lose the land as well. He didn't want that, did he? He's looking for economic prosperity and not to help Naomi. So, with all that in mind, he gave up his right to be the kinsman redeemer. Now, Boaz wasn't interested in the land, was he? He was interested in Ruth, and he was interested in taking care of Naomi. He's already been doing that to a certain extent already. So he quickly declares his intentions and completed all the necessary legalities. Look at verse 7 to 12. Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the redemption and the exchange of land to confirm any matter. A man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. So the next time I make a deal with somebody, I want to give you my dirty shoe. And then you'll know I'm serious about that, right? But the writer of this letter needed to describe and explain this. So apparently when whoever wrote this, at their time, they didn't do this anymore. This tradition went away, or maybe it was just confined to one small area, but the writer felt like he needed to explain the custom. So he does that there, verse 8. So the closest relative said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance, so that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today." All the people who were in the court and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel, and may you achieve wealth in Ephrath and become famous in Bethlehem. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through your offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman." So Boaz calls upon these witnesses, clarified the details that he was doing, what he was doing by purchasing the land from Naomi, marrying Ruth to perpetuate the deceased man's name. The people accepted their role of witnesses. They call this legal transaction to be complete, and they offer their blessings upon Boaz and Ruth. So our story, a lot of twists, a lot of turns, a lot of ups, a lot of downs, but it concludes with how we like to see most stories concluding. And they lived happily ever after. Fantastic. Not too many books of the Bible end like that, do they? And they live happily ever after. Verses 13 through 17. So Boaz took Ruth, she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today. And may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." So they named him Obed. And he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So God's favor, God's blessing came shining through, right? For Naomi and for Ruth. Complete change from what was happening over in chapter 1. Poor Naomi, so bitter, thinking the Lord's hand was against her. She and her sons were in Moab for 10 years. While there, they married, they died. They weren't sure how many years they were married before their deaths, but no children. Apparently, Ruth could not conceive, but God caused her to conceive here at the end, and she bore a son. Again, life often has one curve after another, and we never know what's coming around the next bend or over the next hill. And that's why we need to trust in the Lord. And did you notice how the child wasn't only important to Boaz and important to Ruth, but also important to Naomi, right? I like that picture. There she is. She's sitting down. You know she was smiling. That little grandson on her lap. She probably never thought that day was going to come. The story of Ruth begins with death, and it ends with life. The women there in the neighborhood said, a son has been born to Naomi. Well, not literally, but it was a child for her. She thought her line was over with. It was coming to an end. But because of Ruth, because of Boaz, because of the Lord, they continue on. Ruth was written to help us to learn to trust God, even when the clouds are so dark that we cannot see beyond them to the sun rising up. And we need to be reminded of the fact that it was God who acted to turn each setback into a stepping stone to joy. That in all of our bitter providences, it is God who is plotting out our good. But this story is more than just a story of, an old grandmother hugging a new grandson. The grandson's name was Obed, who was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. And all of a sudden, if you're reading it for the first time, you realize all along something far greater was taking place. This wasn't something done just for Naomi and just for Ruth, but God was looking at the whole nation, in fact, the whole world and generations to come when he was looking down upon these two girls. And I also don't want to suggest that the book of Ruth guarantees all people who experience trauma find the same kind of happy normalcy. Elimelech and his two sons and other people died in the famine that Judah experienced. We live in a world of hardship. We live in a world of heartbreak, a world of hatred and bitterness, a world of violence and abuse. A lot of bad things happen. And all these things lead to suffering and questioning. In our adult Bible class this morning, we were looking at the person of Job. And if you've ever read or you know that story, I found out that a lot of the kid classes, they were all learning about Job too, so that worked out nice. So when you think about that, did he have a great life? In the beginning he did, but then it all went down, didn't it? And as we saw in the adult Bible class, there was bitterness welling up in Job. And he began to accuse God and make statements. Why aren't you listening to me? Why are you letting this happen? One after another, after another, after another. And that's why in chapter 38, it opens up with God answering him by saying, who is this who darkens my counsel? In other words, and then he goes on asking all these questions about, what do you really know? You don't know what's going on. I do. You can't see the bigger picture. I can. You need to trust in me. Like Joseph did, didn't he? We know that story. Like Esther was told to. You don't know, her uncle told her. If you are not put in that position of being queen for such a time as this, and if you don't do it now, God will raise up another to take care of his people. Mordecai was right. And we see it happening here again in Ruth. Naomi couldn't see it, but God was using her and Ruth to raise up, you could say, a redeemer. A redeemer. Bringing the true Redeemer, Christ, to us. And another thing that's important, that's revealed in this story, is having relationships in the midst of bitterness and trauma. Poor Job, he was, as all those things were happening to him, and he lost everything. He lost his family. His wife told him to curse God and die. And he's sitting there with all the sores from his head to the soles of his feet. He had nothing left. But his friends came. And they saw that he was in much pain. And these are good friends. misguided, they were good friends. They sat down around Job, and they sat there and didn't say a word for 7 days. 7 days. And then Job opened up, and he began to list out how he wished he had never been born. And that's when they told him, Job, you reap what you sow. You need to repent. And that began the catalyst of all the discussions through the story. For Job said, I've done nothing wrong. God, why are you doing this to me? But God wasn't. He couldn't see. Naomi couldn't see what was happening, and she was bitter. But she had Ruth with her. And Ruth was better friend to her than Job's friends were to him. And she encouraged her, and then there was Boaz, and then Naomi began to see, began to have an idea, maybe this is where it's going, and things began to spring up. We need to have the right kind of community around us, a stable one, like Naomi had. We need one another, so let's be there for each other, and let's make sure we allow others to be there for us when we are weak, when we are hurting. I want to conclude by reminding us of a lesson we've been learning all throughout this, that is God is always working behind the scenes in our lives. Do we see God speaking to anybody in the book of Ruth? Do we see a prophet coming, giving a word from God in the book of Ruth? Nothing. Nothing at all. But we see a lot of coincidences, right? A whole lot of them. It just happened to be this way. It just happened to be that. And then, it just happens that they're going to have a son, and that son's going to be the father of Obed, and they will have Obed. Obed will be the father of Jesse, and Jesse will be the father of David. Wow, what a coincidence. Not at all. The hand of God was working through them. God didn't perform any miracles. He didn't speak. He didn't drop bread from heaven. But he was working in their lives. We may see a lot of bad things happening in our lives. A lot of bad things maybe around us or happening directly to us. We don't know what is going on in the grand scheme of things like God does. He has given us his word. We know where things are going. We know what we ought to be doing. And if we simply just hold fast and hold true, maybe this life will never get better, but we do know, as Alex read from in the book about Malachi, we will be like calves letting out of the stall, and we will be dancing along the streets at the end, trampling down the wicked, because they'll be just ash. And we will have life eternal with the Lord. That we do know. That we know. That's another thing, as I, again, wrap up. Another thing, I was talking to my children before adult class started. I was asking them about Job, and I asked them, what is faith? And they were wondering, they weren't sure. So, well, we defined it from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, right? Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, or as the New King James says, the evidence of things not seen. And what that means is, it's just like if someone asks you to describe to them wind. How do you describe wind? You can't. You can't see wind, but you can see the effects of it. I asked my boys that, and they said, like the flag flapping in the wind. That's right. There's evidence of the wind. We see it all around us. Is there evidence of God? And there is all around us. There's us. The very flesh and internal workings of our bodies. We look at our earth and the universe, the placement of the earth and the moon, and we've had lessons on this, the apologetics that we've gone through. I know Alex has done that with the high school class. So many things that point to that there is a God. Faith. And it is that faith that helps us overcome the world. 1 John chapter 5. Because we see the evidence. We know the truth. We know who is in control. We may not see the bigger picture, but we know God is there and is at work. He did it in the life of Joseph. He did it in the life of Moses. He did it in the life of David, and so on, Ruth and Naomi, and on, all throughout the Old Testament. Again and again and again. And he is still working in our lives for the betterment of the church, to bring many sons to glory. He's put you and me here in this day and age for such a time as this. We are interacting with people every day for such a time as this. We ought to be the most joyous people on the face of the planet because we know what's coming. We know where we are going. We know who is in charge. No matter what's happening in this world, we know. And that joy is the light that shall be shining into a lost and dying world of darkness. Are we that light? Are we letting people see the joy of Christ in us and the great purpose of God in our own lives so that they may inquire of us and give us that opportunity to speak to them those truths? For such a time as this is why we're here. Planting the message of God in the mind and heart of everyone we come in contact with. Every one of them. Are we doing that? Are we like Ruth? Are we like Boaz, where everything we have and everything we do, we see it to being the glory of God? And when we do that, we fulfill his purpose. And we will be blessed. If not in this life, it will be in the next. If we just hold firm. Think about that.